The massive space station spun slowly around Nexus Prime, its metal corridors buzzing with the voices of dozens of different alien species. When the transport shuttle docked at Base 7, most beings barely glanced up from their duties. But when Rookie Officer Kate Williams stepped through the airlock, everything seemed to pause for just a moment. Kate stood barely over 5 feet tall, her standard-issue uniform looking almost comically oversized compared to the massive aliens around her. Her brown hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her green eyes darted nervously as she took in her new workplace. The ceiling stretched high above her head, built to accommodate species that towered over humans. Even the doorways seemed designed for giants. Hidden in the shadows of an observation deck, 3 levels up, something watched her every move. Crowthon was not like the other security officers on the station. While most aliens here were bureaucrats or low-level enforcers, he was something else entirely. Standing nearly 9 feet tall with skin like black armor and eyes that glowed faintly red in dim light, he belonged to a species that had once conquered 12 star systems before finally agreeing to join the peaceful Galactic Council. The Apex people were born killers. Their children learned to hunt before they could properly walk. Their warriors could tear through reinforced steel with their bare claws. Crowthon himself had led raids that brought entire planets to their knees. Even now, decades after his people had sworn off conquest, other species gave him a wide berth in the corridors. Some whispered that having an apex on the station was like keeping a loaded weapon in the armory. But today, this legendary predator found himself fascinated by the tiny human below. She moved differently than the other new recruits he had observed over the years. Most aliens arrived with confidence, eager to show off their natural advantages. The hegemony reptiles flexed their armored scales. The crystalline beings let light refract through their translucent bodies. The gas-dwelling nebulans floated proudly in their environmental suits. Kate Williams carried herself with quiet determination instead of arrogance. When she reached the Central Security desk to receive her assignment, Crowthon noticed how carefully she studied everything around her. Her eyes tracked the alien symbols on wall displays, trying to make sense of languages she had never seen before. Officer Jackson, the station's human liaison, handed Kate a standard-issue tablet loaded with her duties and protocols. The device was designed for universal use, but Crowthon could see immediately that Kate was struggling with the interface. Her fingers hesitated over controls that would have been intuitive to most species. The holographic display flickered as she accidentally triggered wrong commands. A group of officers nearby began to snicker. Lieutenant Commander Voss, a massive reptilian whose scales shifted from green to amused yellow, turned to his colleagues with a grin that showed rows of sharp teeth. "Look at the little human," he hissed in the common tongue, making sure his voice carried. "She cannot even operate basic equipment. How does Earth expect such creatures to contribute to galactic security?" His companion, a floating nebula named Drift, pulsed with colors that indicated laughter. "Perhaps we should start a betting pool. I give her 3 rotations before she runs back to her home world crying." 3 rotations? Voss clicked his claws together. "You are being generous, friend. I say she will not last 1 full cycle. These humans are soft. They have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities. What use could such a weak species possibly be among proper warriors?" From his vantage point, Crowthon watched Kate's reaction to their words. Her shoulders tensed slightly and her jaw clenched, but she did not look up from her tablet. Instead, she seemed to focus even more intensely on the task at hand. When she made another mistake with the interface, causing an error message to flash in bright alien script, she took a deep breath and started over. This response intrigued the apex warrior. In his experience, there were only 2 ways beings reacted to mockery. They either lashed out in anger or cowered in submission. Kate Williams was doing neither. She was enduring, learning, adapting. It was not the response he expected from what others called a weak species. The betting continued around the security desk as more officers joined in the cruel game. They wagered on everything from how quickly Kate would quit to how many mistakes she would make on her first patrol. Through it all, she kept working with the tablet, slowly but steadily mastering its alien functions. By the end of her first hour, she had successfully logged into the system and begun studying the station's complex layout. Crowthon found himself wondering what other surprises this small human might have in store. The piercing wail of emergency sirens shattered the usual hum of station life on Kate's third day. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in an angry glow as automated voices announced a crisis in dozens of alien languages. Kate rushed toward the Central Command Center along with other security personnel, her heart pounding as she tried to process what was happening. The Commerce Hub had been taken. This was the station's busiest civilian area, where traders from across the galaxy gathered to buy and sell goods. Families shopped there. Children played in the recreational areas while their parents conducted business. Now it had become a nightmare. Through the command center's main display screen, Kate could see the attackers clearly. The Draxian raiders stood like living statues made of crystal and rage. Their bodies were covered in natural armor that looked like polished gemstones, but Kate knew from her training that those beautiful surfaces could deflect most energy weapons. Each raider stood over 7 feet tall, their multiple arms ending in razor-sharp claws that could slice through metal. Commander Hayes, the station's chief security officer, stared at the tactical display with grim determination. Around him, senior officers from various species argued about the best approach. The hegemony reptiles wanted to use heavy weapons and storm the hub directly. The gaseous nebulans suggested flooding the area with sleeping gas, though that might harm the hostages as much as the raiders. Lieutenant Commander Voss paced back and forth, his scales shifting to frustrated orange colors. "These Draxian criminals have chosen their position well," he hissed. "The Commerce Hub has only 3 main entrances, all of which they can easily defend. Our heavy weapons would bring down half the station if we use them in such a confined space." Through the security cameras, they could see roughly 40 hostages cowering behind overturned market stalls. The raiders had herded them into the center of the hub's main plaza, where crystal fountains normally provided a peaceful atmosphere. Now those same fountains served as barriers that the Draxians could use for cover. The lead raider, distinguishable by the crown-like formation of crystals on his head, stood addressing the cameras directly. His voice came through the speakers in harsh, clicking sounds that the universal translator struggled to interpret. "We demand safe passage to the outer rim." The machine finally managed to convert his words. "Provide us with a fast ship and fuel, or these soft bodies will share our fate." Kate listened to the debate around her, growing more frustrated by the minute. Every plan the senior officer suggested involved significant risk to the hostages. Storm the hub, and people would die in the crossfire. Wait too long, and the raiders might start executing prisoners to prove they were serious. Use gas weapons, and the civilians might suffocate along with their captors. While the commanders argued, Kate quietly accessed her personal tablet and began studying everything the station database contained about Draxian culture. She learned that these crystalline beings came from a harsh world where resources were scarce, and survival meant taking what you needed from others. But she also discovered something interesting about their social structure and communication patterns. What if someone could talk to them? Kate suddenly asked, her voice cutting through the heated debate. The room fell silent. Commander Hayes turned to look at her with raised eyebrows. "Talk to them, Williams? These are hardened criminals, not diplomats looking to negotiate." "But they are Draxians," Kate replied, her fingers still working on her tablet. "According to the cultural files, their society values direct communication and respect for cunning. They might listen to someone who approaches them properly, using their own customs and language." Voss snorted with derision. "Even if that were true, none of us speak proper Draxian. The universal translators are useful, but they miss important cultural nuances. Besides, who would be foolish enough to walk into that death trap?" Kate took a deep breath. She had been studying the station's layout obsessively since her arrival, memorizing every corridor and maintenance shaft. An idea was forming in her mind, dangerous but possibly workable. "The maintenance ducts," she said quietly. "They run throughout the Commerce Hub for environmental systems. Most of them are too narrow for larger species, but a human could crawl through them." "Absolutely not," Commander Hayes said firmly. "Williams, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you are not qualified for this kind of operation. We need to wait for the specialized negotiation team from Sector Command." "How long will that take?" Kate asked. "The nearest specialized unit is 12 hours away." Do we really think these raiders will wait that long before they start hurting people? In his hidden observation post, Crowthon watched this exchange with growing interest. The small human was proposing something that bordered on insanity, but her logic was sound. The apex warrior had fought Draxians before and knew their psychology. They respected boldness and direct action. A surprise approach through the maintenance system might actually work, if the person attempting it understood how to speak to them properly. Kate was already pulling up schematics of the station's infrastructure on her tablet. "Look," she said, pointing to the display. "The main environmental shaft runs directly over the Commerce Hub's central plaza. There are access panels every 50 meters. If someone could get close enough to speak directly to the raiders, without seeming like a threat, they might listen. And if they decide to kill the messenger?" Voss asked mockingly. Kate's green eyes hardened with determination. "Then at least we'll know talking won't work, and we can try the assault plan. But right now, we're just waiting and hoping while 40 innocent people wonder if it'll die today." The room fell quiet again as the senior officers considered her words. Through the speakers, they could hear children crying among the hostages, and the harsh clicking voices of the raiders becoming more agitated as time passed. Kate had managed to crawl through the narrow maintenance shaft for nearly 20 minutes. Her knees scraped raw against the metal flooring, and her uniform soaked with sweat. The confined space pressed against her from all sides, making every breath feel labored. But she pressed forward, driven by the sounds of frightened voices echoing from the Commerce Hub below. When she finally reached the access panel directly above the central plaza, Kate carefully removed the cover and peered down at the scene below. The Draxian raiders had positioned themselves in a defensive circle around the hostages, their crystalline bodies catching and reflecting the emergency lighting in prismatic patterns. She could see families huddled together, parents shielding their children with their own bodies. Taking a deep breath, Kate lowered herself through the opening until she hung from the ceiling by her fingertips. Then she dropped down onto a market stall about 15 feet below, landing with a soft thud that immediately drew the attention of every being in the plaza. The lead raider, his crystal crown gleaming like a deadly tiara, spun toward her with weapons raised. Kate slowly lifted her hands to show she was unarmed, then began speaking in the broken Draxian phrases she had memorized from the station database. "Greetings, honored Crystalkin," she said, the harsh clicking sounds feeling strange on her human tongue. "I come to speak of mutual benefit, not conflict." For a moment, the raider leader seemed genuinely surprised. His weapon lowered slightly as he responded in his own language, speaking slowly enough that Kate could follow most of his words. He was asking why a soft-skin would dare approach them, and whether she understood that her people were considered prey by his kind. Kate's heart sank as she realized her plan was falling apart. The cultural files had not mentioned this crucial detail about how Draxians viewed humans. She tried to explain that she came in peace, that there might be a way to resolve the situation without violence, but she could see the raider's attitude changing as he processed what she was. "You mock us," the leader suddenly snarled, switching to the common tongue so the hostages could understand. "Sending prey to negotiate with hunters. Your commander showed no respect." His crystalline armor began to glow with an inner light that Kate recognized as a sign of extreme agitation. The other raiders raised their weapons as well, and several hostages screamed as they realized the situation was about to turn deadly. Kate found herself trapped in the middle of the plaza, with nowhere to run and no backup plan. She had risked everything on a desperate gamble, and it was about to cost dozens of innocent lives. That was when the shadows moved. Crowthon seemed to materialize from empty air behind the raiders, like death itself taking physical form. One moment there was nothing but darkness near the plaza's edge, and the next moment a 9-foot-tall nightmare stood there with glowing red eyes and claws that could tear through steel. The effect was immediate and devastating. Two of the younger raiders took one look at the legendary apex predator and fled without a word, abandoning their weapons as they ran for the exits. The remaining Draxians slowly lowered their arms, their crystalline bodies dimming, as they recognized a superior predator. The leader tried to maintain some dignity, but his voice shook as he addressed Crowthon in the common tongue. "We surrender to the apex warrior. We know better than to challenge one who hunts the hunters." But even as the immediate crisis ended, Kate noticed something troubling. The hostages were not celebrating their rescue. Instead, many of them cowered just as fearfully from Kralthon as they had from the raiders. Children buried their faces against their parents' shoulders, sobbing in terror. Several adults backed away from both the surrendering criminals and their supposed rescuer. As station security officers flooded into the plaza to take the raiders into custody, Kate watched the traumatized civilians being led away by medical personnel. Many of them would need counseling after this experience, and she realized that some of their fear came not from their captors, but from the dramatic way their rescue had unfolded. When Commander Hayes arrived to debrief the situation, Kate found herself standing face to face with Kralthon for the first time. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had imagined. His black armor-like skin seemed to absorb light, and his red eyes studied her with an intelligence that was both alien and ancient. "Your approach was sound," he said in a voice like grinding stone. The Draxians would have respected direct negotiation under different circumstances. Kate looked around at the plaza, where custodial crews were already cleaning up the aftermath of crisis. Emergency medical teams were treating several hostages for shock and panic attacks. She thought about the children she had seen crying, not just from their ordeal with the raiders, but from the terrifying way it had ended. "Your timing was perfect," she replied, meeting his glowing gaze without flinching. "But the execution could have been better." Kralthon's head tilted slightly, a gesture that in his species indicated surprise. "Explain." Kate gestured toward the medical teams treating the traumatized civilians. "You appear like a monster from their worst nightmares. Yes, you ended the crisis quickly, but you also created additional trauma for the victims. Those children are going to have nightmares about the scary alien who saved them almost as much as the ones who threatened them." The plaza fell silent around them. Other security officers stopped their work to listen, shocked that anyone would dare criticize the legendary Apex warrior. Commander Hayes looked like he was preparing to intervene before Kate got herself killed. But Kralthon did not react with anger. Instead, he studied Kate with what might have been respect. "And what would you have done differently, small human?" Kate straightened her shoulders. "Proper protocol calls for establishing communication with hostages first. Let them know rescue is coming. Provide them with simple instructions to minimize their exposure during the operation. Your dramatic entrance was tactically effective, but it violated basic victim safety guidelines." For several long seconds, Predator and human stared at each other, while everyone else held their breath. 2 weeks after the hostage crisis, the station was rocked by something far more sinister than raiders or pirates. Bodies were being found in the quieter sections of the complex, each victim killed with surgical precision that spoke of professional training. The murder sent waves of fear through the civilian population, and even security officers seemed on edge. Kate stood in the morgue beside Dr. Hendricks, the station's chief medical examiner, studying the latest victim. The deceased was a hegemony trader named Vexlos, found in a storage bay near the outer docking ring. Like the 3 victims before him, he had been killed by a single precise strike that severed vital nerve clusters unique to a species. "This is the work of someone who understands alien anatomy perfectly," Dr. Hendricks explained, pointing to the wound with a scanner. "Each victim has been killed using methods specific to their species. The crystalline being was shattered at exactly the right frequency to cause instant death. The Nebulan's life support system was punctured in the one spot that would cause immediate suffocation. This hegemony reptile had his primary neural pathway severed with millimeter precision." Kate studied the files on her tablet, frowning as she reviewed the crime scenes. What connects these victims? They're all from different species, different professions, different social levels. Commander Hayes had assigned Kate to assist with the investigation, though she suspected this was mainly to keep her busy rather than because of her detective skills. The senior officers were handling what they considered the important work of tracking down the killer's methods and likely escape routes. But as Kate dug deeper into the victims' backgrounds, she began to notice patterns that others had missed. All 4 deceased individuals had been frequent visitors to the station's administrative levels. Each had made multiple trips to the records department in the weeks before their deaths. Most intriguingly, they had all filed complaint about security irregularities they claimed to have witnessed. Her investigation led her to request access to the station's personnel files, looking for connections between the victims and current staff members. It was detailed, tedious work that required cross-referencing hundreds of data points and transaction records. The kind of investigation that required patience rather than firepower. Unknown to Kate, she was being watched. Kralthon had been conducting his own investigation into the murders, approaching the problem from the perspective of a trained killer. The precision of the attacks reminded him strongly of assassination techniques used by his own people during their conquest years. But while he focused on the methods, he found himself increasingly curious about the humans' different approach. Through security monitors, he observed Kate spending hours in the records department, building timelines and connection charts that looked nothing like the tactical analyses favored by other investigators. She seemed more interested in who the victims were than how they had died. Her persistence paid off when she discovered that all 4 victims had filed formal complaints about irregularities in their security clearance checks. Each had reported being charged additional fees for background verification, fees that were not part of standard station protocol. The complaints had been filed with Deputy Administrator Rex, a mid-level hegemony official who handles civilian documentation. Kate brought her findings to Commander Hayes, but was told that the investigation team was pursuing more promising leads related to the killer's combat training. Her theories about administrative corruption were dismissed as coincidental. Frustrated but determined, she decided to continue her investigation unofficially. That evening, Kate made her way to Deputy Administrator Rex's office in the Civilian Administration section. The area was nearly deserted after normal working hours, with only minimal security patrols and automated systems monitoring the corridors. She had prepared a cover story about needing to file some paperwork, but when she arrived at Rex's office, she found the door standing slightly ajar. Inside, she discovered Rex slumped over his desk, very much dead. But unlike the previous victims, this murder scene looked different. There were signs of a struggle, and the office had been searched hastily. Papers were scattered across the floor, and several computer terminals showed signs of data being rapidly deleted. Kate was photographing the scene with her tablet when she heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Moving quickly, she hid behind a large filing cabinet just as someone entered the office. Through a gap between the files, she could see a figure in maintenance coveralls moving efficiently through the room, continuing the process of destroying evidence. The person was human, which surprised her. All the security briefings had suggested they were looking for an alien assassin with specialized knowledge of various species' anatomies. But this individual moved with the same professional precision that had characterized all the murders. Kate tried to get a better view and accidentally knocked against the filing cabinet. The slight sound was enough to alert the intruder, who spun toward her hiding place with a weapon drawn. In that moment, Kate realized she was facing the killer, and she was completely alone and unarmed. The assassin advanced toward the filing cabinet, ready to eliminate this unexpected witness. Kate pressed herself against the wall, knowing there was nowhere to run and no way to call for help without revealing her exact location. That was when the office lights suddenly went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. Kate heard a sound like tearing metal, followed by a brief, strangled cry. When emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, she saw Kralthon standing over the unconscious form of the assassin. "How did you know I was here?" Kate asked, stepping out from behind the cabinet. Kralthon's red eyes glowed in the dim emergency lighting. "I have been tracking your investigation. Your methods are unconventional but effective. When you discovered the connection to this administrator, I calculated there was a high probability you would investigate alone." Together, they searched the assassin and found evidence that confirmed Kate's theory. The killer was part of a larger conspiracy involving several station officials who had been selling security clearances and access codes to criminal organizations. The murder victims had stumbled upon the scheme and been eliminated to protect the operation. As they prepared to call for backup, Kate noticed something that made her blood run cold. The assassin was wearing a vest packed with explosive charges, and a small device on his wrist was blinking faster and faster. Without thinking, Kate threw herself between Kralthon and the unconscious killer just as the device reached its final countdown. The explosion that followed brought down half the office ceiling and sent both of them flying across the room. The formal review chamber on Galactic Security Station Nexus Prime had never hosted a hearing quite like this one. Kate Williams sat at a small table in the center of the room, surrounded by towering representatives from 7 different species. The circular chamber was designed to intimidate, with the review board members seated on elevated platforms that forced anyone being evaluated to crane their neck upward to address them. 8 months had passed since Kate's first day on the station, and her partnership with Crowthon had become the subject of countless rumors and stories throughout the sector. Some called it impossible. Others whispered that it was dangerous. But no one could argue with the results they had achieved together. Commander Hayes sat to Kate's left, shuffling through her performance files with obvious pride. In less than a year, Kate had been involved in resolving 3 major security incidents, uncovered a corruption ring that had been operating for years, and established new protocols for cross-species communication during crisis situations. Her methods were unconventional, but they worked. The review board, however, remained skeptical. Admiral Threxvar, a massive hegemony commander whose scales had turned the deep purple of serious contemplation, leaned forward in his elevated seat. "Officer Williams," he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone, "your record shows commendable results, but your methods concern this board. You consistently ignore standard protocols in favor of improvised approaches." Kate straightened in her chair, meeting the alien admiral's gaze without flinching. "With respect, Admiral, standard protocols were designed primarily for species with natural advantages that humans lack. We have to find different solutions because we face the same problems with different tools." "Different tools," scoffed Council Member Drixthal, a crystalline being whose translucent body pulsed with skeptical orange light. "You mean inferior tools? Humans are physically weak, lack natural weapons, have no special sensory abilities, and demonstrate concerning emotional instability under pressure." The accusation stung, but Kate had learned to expect such attitudes from some species. She was preparing to defend herself when something unprecedented happened. A door at the back of the chamber opened, and Crowthon entered. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned back as if trying to put more distance between themselves and the legendary predator. Crowthon had never attended a formal review before, and his presence transformed the entire atmosphere of the proceedings. Admiral Threxvar's scales shifted to surprise yellow. "Apex Crowthon, this is highly irregular. Review hearings are restricted to board members and the officer under evaluation." Crowthon moved with fluid grace to stand beside Kate's table, his 9-foot frame casting a shadow across the chamber floor. "I invoke the right of combat testimony," he said in his deep, resonant voice. "As Officer Williams' partner, I claim the privilege of speaking on her behalf." A murmur of shock rippled through the chamber. The right of combat testimony was an ancient Apex tradition that had not been invoked in over 2 centuries. It meant that a warrior was willing to stake their own honor and reputation on their testimony. Among Crowthon's people, this was considered more binding than any oath. Council Member Drixthal's crystalline body flashed with indignant red light. "This is unnecessary. We are simply conducting a standard fitness evaluation." "There is nothing standard about this evaluation," Crowthon replied, his red eyes scanning the elevated platforms around the chamber. "You question whether humans deserve a place among galactic security forces. You debate whether their perceived weaknesses outweigh their contributions, but you measure them by standards that do not account for their greatest strength." Kate looked up at her partner in surprise. In all their time working together, Crowthon had never spoken so openly about human capabilities. He was a being of few words, preferring action to speeches. Admiral Threxvar leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "And what strength is that, Apex Warrior?" Crowthon placed one massive hand on Kate's shoulder, a gesture that would have terrified most beings but felt reassuring to her. "Humans possess something my people have never understood," he said. "We Apex are born predators. We are stronger, faster, and more deadly than almost any species in the galaxy. But in all our centuries of conquest, we never learned to inspire others to be more than their nature intended." He paused, looking directly at each board member in turn. "This human has taught me something that no warrior training ever could. She has shown me that true strength is not about being the most dangerous creature in the room. It is about having the courage to make others want to be better than they are. Council member Drixthal pulsed with skeptical orange light. Pretty words, but how does this translate to practical security operations? I will tell you, Crowthon continued, his voice growing more intense. When Officer Williams entered that commerce hub to face the Draxian raiders, she was not trying to prove her physical superiority. She was trying to find a solution that would save lives. When she criticized my rescue methods, she was not challenging my authority. She was teaching me to consider the welfare of those we are sworn to protect. Kate felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she listened to her partner's words. She had never realized that their interactions had affected him so profoundly. In the corruption investigation, Crowthon went on, she showed me that sometimes the most important battles are fought with patience and intelligence rather than claws and fangs. And when she threw herself between me and that explosive device, she demonstrated something that no predator instinct could ever teach. Admiral Threxvar's scales had shifted to deep blue, indicating profound thought. And what was that? Apex Crowthon. Crowthon's red eyes seemed to glow brighter as he delivered his final testimony. She showed me that the willingness to sacrifice oneself for others is the highest form of strength any being can possess. My people spent centuries believing that might makes right, that the strongest predator should rule. But this small human has proven that real power comes from lifting others up, not striking them down. The chamber fell silent as the board members absorbed these words. Kate wiped away a tear that had formed in the corner of her eye, overwhelmed by the depth of respect and friendship her partner had just expressed. 3 hours later, Kate walked out of the review chamber wearing the insignia of senior investigator, the youngest being ever promoted to that rank in the history of galactic security. But more importantly, she walked beside a friend who had shown her that even the galaxy's most dangerous predators could choose to be something greater than their nature intended. As they made their way through the station's corridors, Crowthon spoke quietly. You have changed me, Kate Williams. Made me understand that being truly dangerous is not about inspiring fear, but about inspiring hope. Kate smiled up at her towering partner. Maybe we've changed each other. Maybe that's what real partnership means.